Hey everyone, welcome back to Tip of the Week. In this week's video, we're going to learn how to create depth in our portraits by using textures and blend modes inside On1 Photo RAW 2020. So let's jump right in and get started. So now we're inside On1 Photo RAW and we're going to edit this portrait here. And the reason that I chose this portrait is because of this large wall of tonality behind the model here. This is going to be an awesome template for us to lay on textures and things that will give our photo more depth. But the one thing that I don't like about this portrait is this large sky area up top here. So what we're going to do first is we're going to duplicate this base layer by just selecting the layer. I'm going to head down to this button here. This is my duplicate layer button. And then this is just telling me that it's going to create a layer for me. So I'll add layer. And now I have my base copy one. And I can rename it by just double clicking, and I'll rename it wall. So now we have our wall layer so that we can extend this wall to cover up our sky. I'm just going to hit V on my keyboard and that will grab me my transform tool. With my transform tool selected, I can move my layers around. So I'll just grab this wall layer and I'll drag it all the way up. Then I'll hit B on my keyboard to grab the masking brush. And with the masking brush selected, I'm going to make sure that I have paint out as my mode. So I'll hold down Shift and hit X on my keyboard. And that will switch my mode from paint in to paint out. Then I'll just increase my brush size with the bracket keys on my keyboard. And I can brush away this foreground area that I don't want on my scene. And then I'll just lower my brush size to paint away the model here. Make it a little bit smaller. Perfect, just like that. So now we've extended this wall area all the way up to the top of the scene so that we're not seeing any of that sky area below it. Now I'm just going to head over to my layers. I'm going to right click in my layers and I'm going to select New Stamped Layer. Stamping the layers is going to take these two bottom layers here, duplicate them, and then merge them together into one cohesive composite. That's this layer right here. I'll just double click and rename it Composite. Now in my composite layer, the next step to creating depth in this photograph is to go in and modify the color of her skirt here. I'm going to modify the background with some textures, and I want the colors to blend in nicely. And her skirt is just a little bit too off of a color for me, so I'm going to change it real quick by using a blend mode. So I'll just hit Z on my keyboard to grab me my zoom tool, and I can zoom into her dress here. And now we're going to head over to our Local Adjustments tab. Now in this Local Adjustment tab, I'm going to head down and choose Paint with Color. This is going to allow me to paint with whatever color that I want and paint it onto my scene. So I'm going to head over to this rectangle here with this pinkish color inside of it, and I'm going to click it. And this will open up all of my colors that I can use to modify this image. So inside of my colors, I'm actually going to head over to this tab, and I'm going to take my color dropper from this tab right here, and I'm going to hover over her dress, and then I'll just choose a nice area where it's an even tone across all of the dress, like this area here. So I'll just click, and I can see it's a pretty dark colored green. So I'm going to take this slider here, I'm going to move it all the way to the left. Well, maybe not that far, maybe a little bit more to the right, just like that. And then I'm going to lighten up this dress color by dragging this point maybe more over to the yellows and the oranges. Just like that. So now I'm going to exit out of this colors, and I'm going to head over to my adjustment. And in this local adjustment, I'm going to double click the title and I'll rename it Dress Color. Now I'm going to head over to my blending options here in this icon, and I'm going to go to my mode, and I'm going to choose hue. By using the hue blend mode, whenever we paint on this local adjustment, it's going to modify the color of her dress, but it's not going to modify any of the tones inside of it. It's strictly going to just change the color. The next thing I want to do is I want to turn on my perfect brush. And the reason that I want to turn on my perfect brush is so that when I'm painting over here on the side of this dress, I'm not painting on the wall. So I'm going to head up to my top tool modifier bar, and I'm going to choose the perfect brush. I can also enable it by holding down Command and hitting R on my keyboard. Now to modify the perfect brush settings, I'm going to click on this gear icon here. And I'm going to take my color threshold and I'm going to drag it to 11. That's going to allow for more colors to be modified within the perfect brush. Then I'm going to drag my transition all the way up to about 82. That's going to give me nicer transitions between my perfect brush edges. So now I can go in here and I can start painting on this different color by just clicking and moving my brush around. And you can see it's modifying the color really well, and it's just taking the color that's there and changing it to that lighter, more yellow hue. And it looks like we may have gotten a little bit further out on the edge here. So I'm just going to hold down Shift, X. I'm going to lower my brush size a bit. And then I'll just paint away those areas that we got a little bit too crazy on the edges. And then I'll just lower my brush size again. And then I'll come in and just do the same thing to just add it back to that edge. Just like that. So now if I head over to my dress color local adjustment and I turn this off and on, it does a really awesome job of just changing that dress color to a little bit lighter of a green, and it blends in with the scene a bit more. And it's going to blend in a bit better whenever we add the texture onto the background. So I'm just going to Z on my keyboard, I'm going to zoom out. And now let's head into our Develop tab, and let's just go to our trusty AI Auto so it can develop the image's tonality for us. Now I'm going to head into my Effects tab, I'll add a filter, and I'll add textures. So now that we have a texture applied to our image, we now need to remove this texture from everywhere but the wall behind our model here. To do that, I'm going to grab a little bit more of an intense texture just so I can see where it's being applied better. So I'm going to head to my More menu, and I'm going to go down to Red Door, just like that. Now in my Red Door, I'm going to go to Mode, and I'm going to choose Replace. Now because my opacity here is at 50, I can still see a little bit of where the model is. So let's go into our textures here, and I'm going to go into my masking options with this icon, and to strictly apply this to the wall, we're going to use a color range mask. So I'm going to go to my color range mask icon here. I'm going to click this to enable it, and now if I view this, I can see it's already doing a pretty good job of applying this texture strictly to the back area of our scene. But we can do a little bit more to fine tune it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to head into my levels here, and I'm going to modify this level slider, and that will separate the tones in this mask so that we can apply this to the wall behind her. Now within the level slider, Whenever you pull a tone to the right, it's going to remove it from the mask. If you pull that tone to the left, it will apply it to your mask. And we have three separate tones here. We have our shadows, our midtones, and our highlights. So if I want to remove these shadow tones that are in the foreground of my image, I'm just going to grab this far left point, click it, and watch as I drag it to the right. You can see it's removing those areas of white from the foreground area, and then I can just keep doing that. I'll remove a little bit of the midtones, like that, remove some more shadow tones, and then I can drag my highlights to the left, like that. Maybe I'll drag my midtones back to the left. I can move my shadows to the left a hair. And we'll move my highlights to the right a little bit, and then we'll move the midtones to the right. That looks pretty good, just like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit Z on my keyboard. So I can zoom into this area on the photograph, and I'm going to hit B on my keyboard now to grab myself my masking brush. And then I'm just going to brush away this foreground area that I don't want on my scene. So now we've removed all of that white area from the foreground of the mask, but now we need to remove it from our model here. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to remove the majority of it within the mask view, and then I'll see what it looks like when we're viewing the image, and then we can fine-tune it from there. So I'll just zoom in here, again, just hitting B on my keyboard to grab me my masking brush, and then I'll just brush away all of these little areas that are on her dress. I can brush away her shirt here. Just a little bit of area on her shoulder. This little area of shirt right there. And then her little hairpiece. And then to do her arm, I think we should actually just look at it in regular view. Actually, let me get this arm real quick. This arm over here, we can do that one for sure. Sweet, so we got that left side pretty much handled now. Maybe her arm right there needs a little TLC in that area probably. Okay, so now that we've done the left side of her arm, I'm just gonna zoom out. See what that looks like. Okay, now I'm just gonna go to view real quick so we can see what it looks like on top of her. So I'll just zoom in. And it looks pretty great on the left side, but we have a little bit on our arm to the right here. So I'll just hit B again, and we can go in and just clean this up. Lower the brush size a bit. Don't want it to look like a projection. And then we'll just paint it off her fingers and her hand. Just like that. Sweet, I think that looks pretty good. right there. So we'll zoom out now. And so now if I head over to my textures here, obviously the texture is pretty intense on our image, but even just turning it off and on, we have the start of something that we can create into something really awesome. What I typically do here is I use a texture that would look, natural or would look believable in the scene. Now this texture does look a little bit natural, but we can make it even more natural by modifying some of these settings inside of the textures filter. So I'm going to go to my mode here, and I'm going to continue to use this mode replace, but I'm going to head up to this opacity, and I'm going to go all the way to 100. So now we're using 100% of this texture here applied to the shot. Now this doesn't look too bad, but if I turn this off and on, it's pretty intense. And I think we could make it even more believable by using a blend mode. So I'm going to head into my textures filter. I'm going to use this blending mode icon. I'm going to go into my mode, and I'm going to choose overlay. Now overlay is going to add this texture into the contrast of the photograph rather than applying it to the entire image. So if I turn this off and on now, and I lower the opacity a bit, we can still see a little bit of the characteristics of that original wall because we're using this overlay blend mode rather than just replacing everything that was there. So I'm just going to increase that opacity maybe a little bit right there, and then I'll head down to my tone and color for this texture, and I can lower that brightness a little bit. Maybe right there. I can increase or decrease the saturation. That looks pretty good just like that. Now this probably isn't the texture that I would go for with this image, but just to give you guys an example, if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, we haven't done a whole lot to this photograph, and we're already making it look a lot more dynamic with just that one texture. And since we've already created this mask here, we can add in any texture that we want, and it will just be applied to those areas that we already masked. So let's head over to our textures. I'm going to go into my more styles, and let's head up to earth. So if I choose this earth texture, it's going to remove all of the blending modes and whatever modifications we've done to this texture filter, but that's okay because we can cater this texture to the image now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head to my mode again, and I'm going to choose replace. Now because this earth texture is replacing my photograph, it looks a lot different than it did before. Now I'm going to head up to my blending options for this texture, and I'm going to modify the mode, and I'm going to head down to overlay. Now that I'm using the overlay blend mode, it brings a bit more of the warmth back into that texture because now it's pulling some of the colors from the wall that's already there. Now the texture right here is incredibly strong on the photograph, so it doesn't look that natural. But if we modify some of these different sliders, we can make it look a lot better. So if I pull up on my skin tone slider here inside of my blending options, I can remove this texture from some of the midtones within my image. So if I pull up on this, you can see it's protecting those midtone areas within that wall, and it's blending this texture in with it a lot more naturally. So now if I turn off and on this texture, that looks a lot more believable and feels a lot more natural for this scene. So now I can add another filter on top of the shot. I'll just add a curves filter, and we'll give it a little bit of an S-curve to create sort of a cinematic vibe. Just like that. So now if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, I've really created a nice dynamic look on the background here rather than having to settle for that boring wall that was already there. And we can always go into our textures and we can modify the opacity of them so that they're not as strong on our photograph. And one thing we could do to make our texture pop a bit is we could apply a filter strictly to that texture. So because we created this mask in here, what we can do to use it on different filters is we can copy and paste it. So I'll just copy this mask right here. I'll add another filter, and I'll add the sunshine filter. And I'm just going to drag the sunshine filter above the curves filter so that it's right on top. Now if I turn this off and on, it does a good job of boosting up the brightness of our wall here, but I don't like what it does to the model. So let's head into the masking options. Let's paste that mask. And now if we turn this off and on, that brightness boost is only applied to that background area of our wall. So let's pull back on the saturation a little bit and add in a little bit more sunshine. Just like that. Now let's just crop this photograph by hitting C on the keyboard. I'll use a nice 4x5. We'll drag it down a bit. And to finish off the photograph, I'm going to add a filter, and I'll just add a LUTs filter. I'll go into my More Styles, and I'll just choose Iced. Then let's add a vignette. Lower the opacity a bit. And now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, we've made a compelling portrait by simply swapping out the background with a texture and using some blend modes to modify colors. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe on our channel to stay updated whenever we drop new content and new videos. Stay safe out there and have a great rest of your week.